Welcome to this latest edition of the Food Systems Podcast with me, Mark Titterington. I'll be your host for the next half an hour or so. And today we have with us Guy Ziv, Professor in Socio-Environmental Systems at the School of Geography at the University of Leeds and Coordinator of the European Horizon Research Project, BESTMAP. BESTMAP is a Horizon research project, Guy, that I understand has analysed the current impact of agro-environmental policies in Europe. I know on the 7th of February, under the umbrella of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture, you'll be presenting these findings through a conference in Brussels. I want to start, if I may, Guy, by asking you just how effective you think the Common Agriculture Policy is or has been in achieving its environmental and biodiversity goals.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me. I think it's well known that the effectiveness of the Common Agricultural Policy to achieve its environmental and biodiversity goals is quite a complex and contested issue. And there's been some positive notes. In the last CAP reform, there's been significant shift towards more sustainability funding, with at least 35% of the CAP funds allocated to climate, biodiversity, and environmental measures. There's also specific schemes that countries have been putting to directly target environmental improvements, including agroenvironmental and climatic measures, which is what BESTMAP have been looking at, organic farming support, payments for landscape features, etc. And also the new CAP allows states to be more flexible in how they design the agroenvironmental policies, especially with the idea of 1-year eco schemes, which is something that BESTMAP has looked at. On the other hand, there's been issues with the CAP. We know about problems because of the direct payments that are based on farm size that may unintentionally incentivize more intensive production over environmentally friendly practices. The effectiveness of the CAP in different regions is varying, and also there is limited adoption of agroenvironmental schemes. During the project of BESTMAP, we've done interviews with more than 100 farmers, and in most cases, those interviews have mirrored those issues. We found that only a moderate percentage adopt agroenvironmental schemes. In some countries, like the UK, there are only a few options that are the majority of uptake, and those are not necessarily the best environmentally, but more of the low-hanging fruit, those that were easiest to implement. And in some case studies, the farmers have been found to be implementing things that they were already thinking of implementing before and didn't get the funding for, which questions the question of the additionality of those payments. We also found that the farmers choose the least productive land to implement agroenvironmental schemes, which might not be the places where the most environmental or ecological benefit is. What we have done in BESTMAP beyond those interviews is to look at modeling of the decision-making of farmers. This was done with agent-based modeling, and those highlight the same some of those problems of the CAP, that the adoption was low, the models were reproducing that, but also that the potential is there to increase the uptake if you reduce the time of the contract, or you provide more advice, or you reduce the bureaucracy or the reporting requirements. We've complemented all of that work with biophysical modeling, trying to look at farmland beds and the biodiversity. We found that with the good ecological data that we had, different farmland birds reacted differently to agroenvironmental schemes. So although there is a small, statistically significant benefit to the agroenvironmental schemes, it's not necessarily beneficial for all species. And when you look at other ecosystem functions or ecosystem services or public goods, whatever you call them, the status quo adoption of agroenvironmental schemes have a small benefit at landscape scale, which reflects the problems of the CAP. It's small adoption, small area that is actually implementing those schemes, and a kind of moderate ecological benefit or ambition of those schemes.
When I look at the study itself, Guy, it looks to be perhaps one of the most innovative studies that's been undertaken, certainly timely as we start to think about future direction of the CAP. Perhaps you could just summarize in a little bit more detail the methodology that you've employed in BESTMAP in terms of going about it, and any other additional insights that you've got from the way that you went about gathering the information.
Thank you. Yeah, so BESTMAP used what we call a mixed method approach. So we've been combining social science, interviews, surveys, together with data analysis and modeling. At the beginning of the project, we went out, this was pre-pandemic. We've been interviewing in the 5 case study areas that we had, one in the Humber region in the UK, one in South Moravia in the Czech Republic, one in the Mulder region in Germany, one is in Serbia, and one is Catalonia in Spain. And in each one of those, we went and interviewed farmers, asking them quite deep questions about their adoption of agroenvironmental schemes. Why are they doing it? Where are they doing it? Why are they not doing it? For those that are not. And that was a very productive exercise with a lot of learnings, and a couple of publications came out of that interview campaign. We then went on to do some surveys, in some cases national survey in the UK, in other cases it was more targeted surveys, and those included both closed form questions as well as what we call the choice experiment, where you're giving farmers multiple options. Would you have chosen this particular scheme, or this particular scheme, or this particular scheme? And through this exercise, you can learn what kind of preferences they have. Why are they choosing a particular scheme, giving the particular, let's say, length or level of reporting or payment level that you are providing. So that was an exercise we've done, and that's the social science component of the empirical work. We got a lot of data from member states, including what is called the Land Parcel Identification System, or LPIS. LPIS is a system that combines all the data that farmers have to report when they are applying for funding from direct payments. So, for example, the polygons, which are all the farms of your farm, and what kind of crops they grow, what kind of agroenvironmental measures they implement, what kind of ecological focus areas they implement, which is related to the green financing. Getting that information was quite challenging, I must say. This took a lot of time, and it was one of the difficulties we had in the project, because some of the member states did not provide it with data agreements that we could share it even within the project. So we had to kind of change the way we work to actually work around those data sharing agreements. And there's a lot of problems with homogeneity of this data, which is quite difficult to compare different countries, and also to link to other data sources. But we can use this to do analysis and show that, for example, large farms are adopting agroenvironmental schemes much more than smaller farms, possibly because they have the manpower and the resources to employ somebody to apply and put forward the paperwork, which is quite time consuming. We then move on to build and calibrate biophysical models. These are computer models of what's happening on the landscape scale and the farm scale from the adoption of those agroenvironmental schemes. So we've built a model for farmland birds. That was our biodiversity component. This uses a lot of point observations of where we know there were observations of a particular bird species. And we used all the data about the management that we got from the LPIS data. And that was one of the first efforts that we could do it at scale at such high resolution. We modeled the effect of water quality, specifically how much nitrogen and how much phosphate would go into the water streams because of the agricultural production, and how the different agroenvironmental schemes might change that. We looked at food production, and lastly, not least, we looked at soil carbon. how will doing different management of the land will sequester carbon from CO2, basically from the atmosphere into the ground, thus helping us mitigate the issues of climate change. I already mentioned that we use the individual farm level agent-based models. These are simulations of the decision-making of the farmers. And to kind of put all of that together and scale it up, we have worked a very innovative way of using models that were developed on the case study level, one of those 5, and then applying them at pan-European scale, finding out how to extrapolate or transform those into other areas, and what is the limit of that transferability. Because you can just take a model from the Humber region and apply it anywhere in Europe, and vice versa. It just doesn't work. So we had quite a lot of work done on that transferability analysis. And that uses data from the Farm Accountancy Data Network, FADN. And again, something that was quite hard to get our hands on and quite hard to process because of limitations of this data and data privacy of FADN. But overall, we've combined all of the above, which I think is one of the first projects to have done that kind of massive exercise, combining those different methodologies to look at the question of adoption of agroenvironmental scheme and the effect on the environment.
So looking towards the future, Guy, what changes or improvements would you like to see in European agriculture policies to perhaps better support both farmers and the environment?
I think first, there is not enough incentive for farmers to adopt those policies. And simply said, there's not enough money in doing it. I think there's one of the major ways the whole financial incentives was constructed is what's called cost incurred, income forgone. And that was basically saying that you can only pay farmers the amount of money they're losing by doing the agroenvironmental schemes. Now that is some a heritage of the World Trade Organization agreement on agriculture, and to me that's something that while it has good intentions in terms of this WTO trying to avoid distortion of trade. Perhaps when we are talking about agroenvironmental schemes and environmental measures, might be the wrong way to go around it. And what we are trying to think, especially in the UK, is what we call public money for public goods. Can we actually pay farmers for the public goods they're providing, and not base it perhaps on how much they lost by adopting those schemes? Mm. I think there are obviously other reasons. The agroenvironmental schemes in many places are too complex. Mm-hmm. In the UK, we had something called Landscape Enterprise Network, which we studied in a different project. And that's more of a private scheme, if you like, that one of the food companies in the UK is paying its farmers directly to implement very similar agroenvironmental measures as what we call the countryside stewardship. But we see 16-fold increase in adoption rate because it's much simpler for farmers to actually adopt it, much less risk to adopt it, much less bureaucracy. There's also, in general, not enough advice, not enough support for farmers to choose the right thing. I think this is something that is acknowledged, and there are efforts to improve advice and support across Europe. And perhaps we need to be more ambitious in what schemes we implement.
We've obviously got the conference coming up in Brussels at the start of next month on the 7th of February. It's entitled Research Lessons to Inform the Future of CAP Reform. What can we expect from that? What are you hoping to achieve?
Yes, well, first I want to say that we're really happy to have this collaboration between BESTMAP and the Forum for the Future of Agriculture, and looking forward to having that event in Brussels. This is also working together with the other 2 sister projects of BESTMAP, AgriCo and MindStep. So all of those 3 projects were funded together under the same funding call of the European Commission. All three projects have in common one area, which is where we're trying to look at individuals and how individual farmers make decisions and the effect of that on the environment. So I think one thing to expect there is to hear from all of those three projects about that aspect of individual decision making, how might that be incorporated into modeling, into looking at the effect of policy and into policy design. From BESTMAP's perspective, we will be covering the results we got in the case studies. I've briefly touched upon some of those. We've written policy briefs that describe the effect of environmental schemes adoption in each of one of those 5 case studies. We'll have posters on each of the case studies and English translation of those policy briefs. And we'll also be talking about uncertainty. I think uncertainty is an important topic when we try to think about the impact of policy. So the impact of uncertainty on modeling and on policy design. And at the end of our presentation from BESTMAP side, we'll have some suggestions how to improve the CAP. I've briefly mentioned some of those. Those will be led by a panel discussion of policymakers about lessons on research and how do we inform the new CAP and the role of models in this process. I think it is planned that the summary of the discussion and the recommendations from this will be presented also in the March annual conference for the future Forum of the Future of Agriculture. That will be really exciting to see what feedback comes out of that event.
Yeah, well, likewise, Guy, we're very much looking forward to the event next month and also having you with us at our annual meeting. As we bring our conversation today to a close, perhaps a final question from my side. Obviously, we have a year of change coming up at the EU level, the parliamentary elections in the late spring, early summer, followed by a new commission mandate. When you think about the work that you've done and potentially a new agriculture commissioner coming in, what's the key priority or key priorities that they will need to focus on, both in facilitating this effective transition to a more resilient and sustainable food and agriculture system, but ensuring that that is inclusive of conserving, restoring biodiversity, mitigating the loss, and taking on the challenge of climate change?
Yeah, I think this is quite a challenge, and it's always difficult for new commissioners to get their teeth into this and do it quickly. I think it's also giving that the new CAP is, well, in policy terms, just behind the corner. We need to actually start working on it now. So it will be really, required to get up and running. I think one of the challenges we have in general is that, we lack some of the evidence. We'll always be lacking some of that evidence. It would be great, or if the Commission promote more empirical and modeling work, like the work that we've done in BESTMAP. Also, the kind of work that we've done in all projects would not have led to operational tools that we can run by JRC or by the European Commission, off the shelf at the European level. So there's always some different funding sources required to upscale and extend the work that any of those projects I mentioned, BESTMAP, Agrico, and MindStep have done to be able to be used by policymakers. But I think the DG Agri has to make up policy nonetheless, despite having imperfect scientific basis to those decisions. I think, if they allow more expert knowledge into the process, have more local and more devolved policy-making process, I think that will be a way to make sure that the policies that they are putting together have more, are more robust and work better and work more locally, which is something that is difficult to do when you are trying to make very large national scale policies. This is kind of counter to the centralization that has taken over, I think, a lot of policy areas. And of course, there is issues with devolved policy in terms of the cost of implementing it, but it is something that potentially can be better and actually reach more higher ecological benefits than what we are having today. Of course, promoting more of the eco schemes. I mentioned that these 1-year schemes that some of the member states have already started putting together more innovation into it. Our studies and our results definitely show that this will be increasing the uptake, so that's something to push forward. And the other area that I think is really important is monitoring. We should increase the effort we put into monitoring the effect of the agro-environmental schemes on the environment. It was really hard for BESTMAP and for the sister projects, and then generally for policymakers to see and measure and model the impact of what we are doing and what we are spending a lot of money on the environment, because in many cases we don't have the data to actually do that. And that all goes back to monitoring and lack of monitoring. So that's another area that it will be good for the new commissioner to push.
Well, that's terrific, Guy. Thank you so much indeed. I think it's fair to say that the discussion on the Common Agriculture Policy, its future direction is something that the Forum will continue to engage with in the months ahead. Also in line with our own work on how we fund and finance the transition, so that farmers and land managers are not only able to make, but also to sustain the transition that I think many of us would like to see. Professor Guy Ziv, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Congratulations on the research project. We're very much looking forward, as I said, to seeing you and the presentations on the 7th of February, and again to welcome that back at the annual conference at the end of March. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Guy.
Thank you, Mark.
You've been listening to another edition of the Food Systems Podcast, brought to you by the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. Join us again next time.